So after taking a week off, I'm back. I needed that week. But today I'm going to talk about consciousness a little bit, the panorama of consciousness, and some of its components, if you will. So consciousness manifests as force for most of us, which requires energy and exhausts both itself and people. Using force lasts only a while before both people and it begins to collapse. Now, a while may be years, but years pale compared to eternity. Power, on the other hand, becomes more powerful the more it is used, as it can only give and give of itself. Being based in love, power is aligned with spirit, truth, and forgiveness, and thus aligned with the higher nature of the self. For instance, the more one forgives, the more trusting, giving, and loving that person becomes. That would make sense because power is aligned with forgiveness and spiritually advanced truths. For instance, the more we forgive, the more understanding and loving we become, and thus the more we offer forgiveness. On the other side, with force, the more you give, the less you have, and the more you seem to lose. Well, that makes sense too, because force is aligned with the ego, and the ego's premise is, if I win, you lose, and if you win, I lose. And behind that teaching of the ego is the more subtle one of seek but do not find, thus creating a life of misery and teeth gnashing, not just teeth grinding. Now with power, the more you give, the more you have. So the person who is aligned with spirit desires to give. The more you give, again, the more you have. The more you give, the more you are. The more loving a person is, the more love the person has to give. So that person gives and gives and gives and finds that they have unlimited abundance. So we experience the world of our own creation based on what we choose. We choose either spirit or ego. We would say we choose good or evil or right or wrong. So we experience our own creation based on the teacher we have invited in, again, spirit or ego, which is determined by the thoughts we choose to marinate. Most of us believe we are doing the right thing in our lives. But if given some thought, we might agree that we align ourselves with the ego a lot of the time. After all, we get upset, short-fused, angry, depressed, in a mood, worried, stressed, jealous, lonely, devastated, concerned even. And we ruminate also, all day long. We're thinking about something. That is, we spend time in our heads reviewing what has happened in our lives, hoping perhaps that it doesn't happen exactly the same way in the future. So let's take two people and let's say that they experience the same event in the same location. And one of them walks away from the experience praising and feeling gratitude about the experience, while the other walks away with criticism and regret. The one who is miserable will usually speak louder about their experience. And so it is throughout life. One person views the experience one way, while the other does another way. One is happy and uplifted, the other downcast and depressed, perhaps angry. The choice lies within. Never, ever, ever does that choice lie outside of us. They both went to the same event, and they both came away with two different viewpoints. It had nothing to do with the event. Now, although we may say at some point that we feel the way we do because of the event we went to or because of that experience that we had 20 years earlier, and therefore we have no choice but to feel the way we now feel, that is not true. We can only feel what we feel based on what is inside of us. And if we are the type of person who points our fingers away from us, then we will blame that which is not us. But it is not the circumstances that determine how we feel, although most of us live that way. It is the person inside of us that determines the circumstances. So for instance, we have people in our lives and events in our lives that occur every day, and they affect us. So much so that we live to that, unknowingly, unwittingly. And this is what I am talking about, okay? We have choice. There are people out there who have had horrific things in their life, but they choose to view life with joy, not regret, not sadness nor anger, nor as a victim with a victim mentality. All of those are, well, the sadness and the anger and the victim is all about the ego. They are all ego traits and attributes, every one of them. Basically, in the presence of love, we precipitate the emergence of love in others. And when we are in a contrary mood, a follow mood, we can precipitate or bring out the negative side of another person. We all know this. We've all done this. We have this experience. Our mood affects someone else. What this is saying is that we, each and every one of us, are powerful enough to affect another just as they affect us. Our thoughts, our moods, our feelings go beyond our own physical body that we carry around and affect not only other people, but the field also. So once we affect the field, we affect other people. Plants, trees, nature, even rocks, because everything is connected in this world. So what we experience is the world we precipitate by virtue of what we have become. In short, if we are miserable, we will surround ourselves with misery and then have the opportunity to spread that misery by telling others the woeful story. If joyful, we will find joy in our life and share that. So perhaps the most well-known contrast between power, which is precipitated from love, and force, which is precipitated from the ego, is that which occurred a few decades back between an Indian ascetic, Mahatma Gandhi, and the British Empire. One of the most powerful forces at the time on the planet. And yes, I am aware of the juxtaposition of the two words I just used. Powerful force. There's no such thing. It's illusory and it's temporary. Here was this tiny person, skin and bones, standing alone amongst giants, with only knowledge to accompany him. He was a very spiritually oriented individual, who, for those who know this term, calibrated over the level of 700 on the map of consciousness. He was at a level seldom attained by most, and with his decree that he will not eat if the Brits do not leave, he was able to defeat an entire military force without a single shot fired. The British Empire at the time calibrated at 195, well below the level of integrity. The power that he attained that allowed him to become immovable came about because of his decision to remain true to the self. So the British Empire had no choice but to capitulate to his wish, as they could not withstand his power. Now, power does not cause things. Power influences. Force causes things. Force is a factor in the world we live in. Remember, we live in a world of cause and effect when we play by the rules of this world. When we do not play by the rules of this world, we can jump quite high, like Mahatma Gandhi did, and effect change by calling upon the laws of Source. Gandhi exuded power because he found himself, the self, and became self-realized. Therefore, he became powerful. Power, again, influences things and others and is aligned with truth, light, forgiveness, and love. Force changes things forcefully and is aligned with the ego. We create a very powerful field dependent upon our thoughts. And of course, our feelings correspond to our thoughts. So when thoughts are uplifting, Gandhi, by the way, did not think about defeating the British Empire. Rather, he thought about maintaining the status quo peacefully. So when thoughts are uplifting, they influence the field, which in turn creates that which it was given to create, which is that which was thought about. So in today's world, integrity is of predominant value in our society. Yet it was not brought about via force. but as a natural transition, because the field in which we live is becoming more powerful. Why? Because we are moving forward and upward. Sometimes you might doubt that. We would say that we have freedom of choice with most everything we do, and most of us would say that we freely make our own decisions, but that can be argued, and quite winningly, because we are run by programs, subconscious programs, and there is no freedom there. Further, we make decisions based on the input from external sources, such as other people and events around us, rather than choosing based on that which is inside of us. This is why we would choose to transcend the ego. Now, I should say, this is why we should choose to transcend the ego, so that we are not at the effect of the ego, as it dominates all outside events. And for most of us, who are as weak as all get out, it dominates us, thereby leaving us without choice but to follow the masses, do what everyone else is doing, basically to become sheeple. Thoughts reflect themselves. So if we withdraw ourself, that's with a capital S, from the content of thinking, and begin to realize that we are the space in which thinking occurs, then we may begin to realize that not only are we not our thoughts, but also that the thoughts we have don't even belong to us. They are thoughts that exist in the mind, affiliated with the ego mind mostly. Because most of us are mostly aligned with the ego. We get to this realization through meditation, as it allows us to go beyond thought. So let me say something here about meditation. Some of us are adverse to meditating. I've heard things like, I can't do it, it's not for me. Or I'm terrible at it. I've tried and I tried, but I can't do it. Or I can't turn my mind off. Or that stuff just doesn't work. So let me explain something before we continue. No one can turn the mind off. No one. Also, probably north of 99% of anyone who has ever meditated has found it difficult to do so at first. Now, the reason the mind cannot be turned off is because its job, its way of exercising, its very existence is to think, or what passes for thinking. The problem comes in not because the mind thinks, but because we listen to it and believe it is who we are. It is not who we are. We are not the thoughts. We are not the feelings. We are not the body. The difference between someone who doesn't meditate and an experienced meditator is the person who is experienced has already realized they are not the thoughts. So they have stepped back from them. They've learned to step back from them, watch them, and become the observer. How? They had the realization that if they can think about the thoughts that run through their head, then they cannot be those thoughts. It's impossible. There must be something observing those thoughts in order to observe those thoughts. It's so simple, everyone has missed it. Now, it may take weeks or months or even years of practice to have this realization, to actually experience stepping back and observing the thoughts. Well, if it takes years, we may think that's not worth it. But look at it this way. This body is going to live until it dies. How profound is that? We can either learn to meditate and thus learn to be joyful while here, or we can continue not to meditate and remain miserable. Either way, the body will last the same amount of time. In other words, there's nothing to lose. So when we learn through meditation to withdraw from our investment in the content of the mind, that is being so invested in our thoughts, and we learn to go to the space in which the thought is occurring, we begin to see that there is a witness to the thinking, an awareness to the witness, and a substrate that underlies all of it, that is beyond time, beyond space, and that is independent of personal identification. If you meditate long enough, you will experience this. The identification then with awareness itself lifts us out of our belief that we are the body or the mind or the thoughts or the feelings and takes us to a greater dimension. As we move into that greater dimension, we are able to confirm the spiritual reality that underlies our existence. It is at this point that people begin to ask, how can I forgive people I hate so much? How can I feel hope when I am always depressed? Or how can I release this fear when I'm always afraid all the time? So for many, it begins on a very practical level. For others, they become inspired right from the get-go. Once inspired, their words and actions affect the field in such a way that it permeates the rest of us living here, thus allowing all of us to taste the grace of that inspiration. So the person who is not normally drawn to spiritual discourses may suddenly become curious because the field has been affected by one who is spiritually advanced. Thus the person suffering can be lifted by an inspired speaker and slowly become transformed. So the questions that once plagued them are no longer relevant. They're not even asked. The willingness to surrender, to let go of wanting to control our life, to let go of the beliefs that we hold on to and we know not why, other than it's what we were taught when we were young. The ability to surrender our life to God is one of the most profound spiritual tools that we can have. It requires humility, the ability to let go of wanting to change things, to let go of seeing things the way we currently see them, to let go of the belief that that which is outside of us is the problem. That's an incorrect statement and assumption. To surrender everything we have, to let go of our beliefs that are not making us happy, but that we believe are necessary in order to get to heaven, I guess is what you're thinking. This all needs to be surrendered so that we can finally experience some relief, some happiness, some joy. Let's face it, God is not a reality, but a word for most people. A hoped-for reality, but not an experiential reality until one becomes more advanced and begins to experience the field that is always present, but is now present in a different dimension altogether because we are now more advanced. The field becomes palpable at this point, real, alive, with tremendous power. So what can we do on a practical level? Become the best person we can become. Simple. Become kind to all of life and all of its expressions, no matter what. And that's not just human beings. That's tough enough. But every bug. No, that's going too far. No, every form of life in all its expressions. Just be kind from the inside. Become loving to others, especially ourselves. Learn to forgive, starting with ourselves. Express the loving feelings we have inside. Become educated about awareness and the quality of life that can come only from a change within. Understand that we have been programmed to believe what we believe without necessarily any regard to higher truths. And with that understanding, we develop compassion for others and, most importantly, for ourselves. Once we develop understanding, forgiveness comes easier. Just learning and thus surrounding ourselves with spiritual truths elevates our own level of consciousness, which enables us to change how and what we think and feel. The Buddha summed this up well. There is only one sin or error, and that is ignorance. So surround yourself with the knowledge that lifts. Become learned, not of the world as that will offer us nothing except temporary pleasure and pain. But it's temporary. And without getting into it, temporary pleasure and pain is of the ego, even the pleasure. Rather become learned of who you really are. So remember this throughout your week. The kingdom of heaven is not within you. The kingdom of heaven is you. The kingdom of heaven is you. What else but you did the Creator create? And what else but you is His kingdom? There will be more next week. See ya. Have a great day.